Hi, I'm BECMI Berserker and welcome back to my channel. It's time for me to dip my oar into the DM conversation. There's been a lot of talk about a lack of DMs, even the DM crisis, but I don't really want to get into the sensationalist aspect of the conversation. What I do want to bring into the light is what it means to be a DM, and how the relationship with players is cultivated. But I also want to touch on what being a DM means to a DM. Why do it if it's so hard? What is the personal reward for DMs? I've been a DM since 1983. Sure, I played a number of characters from taciturn dwarves in BECMI to a hobgoblin mercenary in 2nd edition AD&D, but I could never put the game down. It captivated me like nothing else around at the time, and took my overactive imagination on journeys to worlds that would never have existed until I conceived them. I tore through reams of graph paper, designed dungeon after dungeon, developed devious campaign plotlines for my group, who by then ruled vast lands and waged wars on their neighbours. One of the negative consequences of this expenditure of creativity and facilitation of other people's enjoyment was not reaching my potential academically, although looking back on that once deep regret with a sage perspective, I actually think things worked out for the best. A lot of the contemporary conversation around DMing has focused on there not being enough DMs around. A repeated reason for this is that DMing 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons requires too much work. The reasoning being there's too much to take into consideration, too many rules, too many options, essentially too much stuff. Now, I've DM'd several 5th edition campaigns, and although there is a lot of stuff to retain, it was my passion for DMing that kept me invested, not the system itself. What I mean by this is, I was willing to put on hold the flaws I found in the system to realise my creative vision. Why? Because I wanted my players to experience a great campaign. Why? Because the payoff for all that creativity and preparation is watching your players react to something you made, something that came out of your mind and is now permeating theirs. Dangling a campaign on a knife edge and driving character development along? That's one hell of an addictive drug right there, especially when they beg for more through the proverbial, "When's the next game?" I'm not talking up my own DMing skills here, this is par for the course for creative DMs, but there are several things at play here, the most important of which is that a DM can only truly be a great DM if they find the right group. What is the right group? Well, newsflash, there is no one-size-fits-all group. But when you find the right mix of individuals, that's golden. The DM creates because the players have bought in, and the players keep coming because the DM gives them a reason to. In my opinion, sharing the same sense of humour is a massive part of it too. But like all supergroups, they eventually break up, right? One player moves on, another has real life stuff, now you have to do Thursday instead of Friday, but so-and-so can't do Thursday, yada yada yada. Whilst the players toss around the scheduling, what gets lost in all of this is the effort the Dungeon Master has made to get things this far. Let me explain by taking a step back for a moment. Why be a Dungeon Master at all? I mean, why go through all the work of developing a story, designing dungeons, fleshing out NPCs, creating nations? Why do it at all when the most the player needs to think about is turning up and trying to remember what happened last week? Well, personally, I'm a DM because it means I get to play every day. Not just every day, but every minute of every day. You know that meme about how a man thinks about the Roman Empire? Screw the Romans. I think about elven and dwarven dynasties that have fallen into ruin. I'm thinking about why the giants of the melting mountains are migrating into human lands. I'm thinking about the movement of illicit goods by dastardly thieves. And I'm thinking about how to get my group's characters involved in all this stuff. Because one thing that gets missed in all the conversations about being a Dungeon Master is what a selfless activity it is. Sure, I get something out of it, but it's akin to giving someone a gift and getting a thrill from the smile split in their face when they see it. Being a Dungeon Master is the giving of your time, for nothing except to see the faces of your players at the big reveal. It's the definition of a selfless activity to facilitate the enjoyment of others. And that moment when your players tell you what an awesome game they had, that's a memory you put in the bank and live on for quite some time. It's the fuel you need to keep going. Now, I know there'll be those out there who'll want to point to professional DMs being motivated financially, but I don't put these in the same category. Sure, they know how to run a game, and some run it well, but the relationship is far too transactional to be meaningful. You might have a good time, but it feels hollow, knowing that they're only there for the money. As a DM who's never charged for a game, I find this approach a creativity killer. I'd be consumed by whether my customers were satisfied, rather than testing the edge of the envelope with intriguing twists and turns. I mean, unless they're paying for more games, what's the point, right? Anyway, let's get back to how most DMs operate, to create enjoyment for others for free. What does this look like between games? What are DMs actually doing to cultivate a great session? Well, the simplest version of this activity would be reading up on a published adventure. Doesn't sound too taxing, right? Well, when you consider 5th edition Wizard of the Coast publications, such as Princes of the Apocalypse, Ghosts of Saltmarsh, etc., each of these publications is around 250 pages of double-columned text. One might say a DM doesn't have to read all of it, but you kind of do to gain a thorough understanding of the world and potential events. And let's not even get into the study of stat blocks to ensure you can run the encounters effectively. And every DM worth their salt knows they'll be reading and rereading this damn book over and over to ensure the sessions go smoothly. Ramping up the DM activity a little and we get to homebrew. World building is a time sink, no matter how much you might enjoy it. You might take the best advice, which is to start things simple, but before long the world is growing as much as your investment in time. This means time not spent on other things. And I'm just touching on the requirements for face-to-face games here. Move things into the virtual space and suddenly you're having to learn how to manage an online VTT, duplicating information virtually just so that a player has the right information, or even just the right token. This can even devolve into sourcing and deciding on the right audio-visual software to use to consider your group's connectivity issues, as if your time wasn't taken up with enough stuff. Of course, there is the vulgar but very real subject of financial expenditure. It's a long-standing joke that DMs spend far too much money on books and other D&D accessories. Why? Because they're looking for a return on their investment. What on earth could that be? Well, isn't it obvious? They want to run games for you, their players. They are spending their hard-earned cash to gift you an enjoyable experience, with mutual benefits. Forget books for the moment. Since 3rd edition and the rise in tactical combat, miniatures are another huge DM expenditure. And now with D&D Beyond, or whatever it's called these days, and virtual tabletops of all types, we have subscription fees and the opportunity to buy electronic versions of the same games we already own in hardback. The sellers are not naive to the fact that DMs have a finite amount of time to input all the data from those books into their online games, and so sell convenience for a product that, in reality, they already own. Many DMs do it, and it is yet another expenditure. If you're fortunate enough to be able to share these costs with your group, then great, but I think most DMs avoid this, as it blurs the lines of ownership, especially when groups break up and players move on. I'll bet that most DMs just keep their subscriptions going, creating content and hoping that eventually they'll form a new group, so that they can share their purchased content with them. Again, another example of selfless behaviour. So when players turn around at short notice and say they can't make the game this week, DMs get really annoyed, and you can kind of understand why. There are a few things to consider here. First, real life happens. I'm not pontificating and jabbing the finger at players who have unexpected things come up that can't be helped. However, game night is game night, and in my opinion, if you value playing the game and keeping your group together, you should be turning up. There's, I would say on average, 5 people's schedules you upset if you don't. I used to play a lot of football, or soccer, as some of you might call it. Monday night was football night. Anything else I had to be scheduled for another night, because everyone knew how disruptive it was when a player didn't turn up. In my mind, game night is no different. If you have a game night, you've made an agreement with others to jointly plan your scheduling around it. So when someone doesn't turn up due to a lame excuse, they impact on every other person, and, in my view, demean the Dungeon Master's effort and expenditure. So to be a DM when there's so much potential for nugatory work, I believe you have to be a special kind of person. What I'm saying is that to remain a DM, you probably require the innate drive to create and share your creations. Also, if I can get a bit psychotherapist for a moment, you're probably the kind of person that seeks affirmation, a kind of external confirmation of the quality of your work. I can speak quite personally that this is a bit of a drug and drives me to improve on every campaign I run, whether that's a realistic goal or not. I set myself stupidly high standards, and I bet there are many DMs listening to this who do the same. So when your group goes plop, that hurts. Turning briefly to the modern phenomena surrounding the DM and player ratio, I think it's not so much to do with systems as it is to do with the disparity in effort. I think we blur the problem with the size of the 5e system due to the huge influx of new players who may not have shown an interest in the genre if it wasn't for externally marketed influences. These newer players may enjoy playing the game, but I don't think this demographic would include a large number of new Dungeon Masters willing to stick around after mainstream popularity has dropped, especially when they learn of the effort required to be a DM. I think it's these voices we hear above the rest of the noise when there are complaints about the DM-player ratio. There are not enough games to join because not enough newcomers are running the games. The real issue is that, in my opinion, the recent influx of players have easier options to sate their gaming needs, and they take the path of least resistance, probably turning to computer games rather than saddling themselves with, for all intents and purposes, the reading and writing of a bunch of stuff, which to anyone new to the game can look like work. As I've already mentioned, the role of a DM, especially a forever DM, can be a thankless task. The drive to create surpasses your better judgment. The drive to bring friends together is a task you take on tirelessly. But as with all creative endeavours, you just can't help yourself, and all you ask in return is for a group to truly reciprocate your effort with some effort of their own. Just turning up is a great start. And if you needed a heartwarming story after all that, an old school buddy I still play with once credited my drive to run games, over the last 4 decades, despite us at times being split over continents, as being the single reason we've remained in touch. Without those games, and without the internet, we may not even be in touch today. I'll take that, but I'll also credit that there is this amazing game in the first place, the game of Dungeons & Dragons, the game that elevated the creativity of generations of Dungeon Masters and enabled them to facilitate the enjoyment of millions of players. So if you know or play with not just a creative DM, but one who seems to spend a disproportionate amount of their cash and time on products just so they can develop worlds for your mutual enjoyment, take a moment to think about that. Do you value them? Do you consider the effort they make so that you have a game to play in the first place? Or is this something you rarely think about when you turn up for your weekly game? And to those DMs out there, does this resonate with you? Do you feel your efforts and outlay is valued? Or do you feel your efforts aren't even noticed? And do you even care? As long as you get to run something for someone, it would be great to know. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching this video. Please consider liking the video if you did indeed like it, and also subscribing to my channel. Otherwise, I'm BECMI Berserker. Keep making your saving throws, and I hope to see you back here soon.